Good afternoon, everyone. Um, as Dr. Gary was speaking, I thought of this quote: "If I see further than others, it is because I stand on the shoulders of giants." And it's an extraordinarily humbling position to be right after her and to introduce Dr. Outlaw, um, especially as we have many conversations with a lot of you about all the things that we're still fighting for our programs, for our profession. It was extremely beautiful to hear that the doors that have been opened by others, the mentorship that was done years before that we are all literally benefiting from right now, and just to realize that there are so much things that we can be doing, but just by being here with one another to fellowship, to learn from each other, is such an amazing thing that is happening. And I hope that, like, for years to come, that we will continue this legacy of excellence. And so it is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce my mentor and my friend, Dr. Freida Outlaw. So Dr. Freida Hopkins Outlaw received her baccalaureate in nursing from Berea College, master's in psychiatric nursing from Boston College, and a Ph.D. from the Catholic University of America, and completed her postdoctoral study in psychosocial oncology at the University of Pennsylvania. She has years of experience as a clinician, researcher, educator, and policymaker in public mental health. She is currently the executive academic program consultant for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration Minority Fellowship Program at the American Nurses Association. Prior, she was the director of the Meharry Youth Health and Wellness Center, a healthcare delivery system for adolescents with special focus on the LGBTQI. For 8 years, Dr. Outlaw served as an assistant commissioner, Division of Special Populations in the State Department of Mental Health and Substance Use Services. For 15 years, she was on the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, where she was the director of the Psychiatric Mental Health Nursing Program. Dr. Outlaw has written in areas of cultural diversity, management of aggression, seclusion, and restraint, and the role of religion, spirituality, and the meaning of prayer for people with cancer, the use of geriatric depression scale with older African American, Black women, and depression, children's mental health, quality of life of African American women caregivers, and the mental health needs of minority transgender youth and children, families, trauma, and stress. And she is also the co-author of a book of Policy and Politics in Nursing of Healthcare, 7th edition, and recognized with the Book of the Year Award in 2015 by the American Nurses Association. Although her bio is extremely impressive, she's extremely warm and kind, and I can stand up here and say she's also a great mentor and an excellent person to talk about internships.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And it is always great to get a recommendation from somebody that you're working with. So, and it's my pleasure. I love it because one of the things I will say is one of the things that we say in the ACEs world is be to somebody who you wished someone was to you. And when I was going through nursing, and I'm going to start by saying there are connections, and we're psych nurses, so we always like to make connections. So I'm going to make a connection with Dr. Faye Gary. I guess Dr. Gary's a little bit ahead of me, but we're in that same general world, growing up world. And I myself, you wouldn't know it because everybody thinks it's Loretta Lynn, but I'm a coal miner's daughter. My father was a coal miner. And that's a whole nother story. But my mother, believing in independence, said, my mother sent me to Chicago, Illinois, when I was 10 years old with my 5-year-old sister. Yeah, we're 5 years apart. And that was a time when things were segregated. So you had to know when in Kentucky to change the bus from Carbon, Kentucky. And when you got to Cincinnati, you could get off out of the colored part of the bus and get on any part of the bus, but you couldn't eat in the restaurant. So I had to know all of that. So when I got to Chicago, we were going to Milwaukee. When I got to Chicago, we had just a little bit of time to run downstairs to get on the Milwaukee bus, because you know how, well, you all probably don't know how to Greyhound buses. lined up. But the Greyhound buses lined up by numbers. You had to get in there, and I was telling my little sister, look, we gotta go. And she was having a tantrum because she wanted a hot dog. So I had to, that's the kind of mother with the independence. So my mother sent me to college with all my luggage and everything by myself on the Greyhound bus, because she said you didn't need to have an escort to go to college, you could make your way. So the Greyhound bus was the way that you got wherever you needed to go. And it was really interesting. I was carefully listening to Dr. Gary. I had a very similar, kind of a similar experience in that in Kentucky you didn't take the SAT, you took the ACT. I grew up in Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky, Harlan County, where U.S. Steel owned the town, so we didn't have a certain kind of poverty because U.S. Steel owned the town, and they were interested in getting that coal out of the mountains, right? So they weren't going to have certain kinds of foolishness like people being too mean to each other. But we lived segregated communities. We were segregated. I went to the Lynch Colored School, and where all my teachers were Black in the beginning, and they really set the foundation for us. So I knew who I was when I was in the 5th grade. I knew I was smart because they taught me and they told me so. I knew I was kind because they taught me at church and all of that. And we knew all Black history. We knew how to sing, lift every voice and sing in the 2nd grade. And if you didn't get all the words right to all the verses, Miss Mabel Harris, whose name changed every year because every 2 years she got a new husband. She would come around and she would say, now baby, you know you got that wrong, and she'd pinch you. And in Kentucky, we had to sing, it was by law, you had to sing the state song. And the state song was, my old Kentucky home is 'Tis summer, the darkies are gay. And Miss Mabel Harris said, we're not doing that. We have to sing the song, but we're not doing that. This was the courage of Black teachers at that time. We sang, 'Tis summer, the comrades are gay. And that's how I grew up until I got in high school when we integrated the schools, and that's a whole nother thing. So those are the connections, but I took my ACTs and I did very, very well. So I got invited to the University of Kentucky, and I will name it, because I haven't forgiven them yet. I got invited to the University of Kentucky to be interviewed for the nursing school, because in state schools, you had to be accepted at that time into the general school, but you did not have to be accepted into the professional schools. And they started telling me about how I needed to have physics and could my parents afford the uniforms. And I'm like, yeah, because my father works for U.S. Steel. You know, I didn't understand, because I was 16, I didn't understand the message. Well, I went back home, but I kind of got the message. And my mother was like, well, we're going to do this and we're going to fight them. And I was like, I said, Mother, because I had sense enough to know that there was an objective part of nursing and a subjective part of nursing. I had that much sense because I'd done my research. And I said, I will never get out of there, so I cannot go there. And so she backed off. I applied to Hampton. She applied me to Berea. I did not apply me to Berea. I applied me to Hampton because I wanted to go to a historically Black school. I applied to Hampton and to Fisk. I got a letter back from Fisk saying they were closing their nursing school. That year, the year I would have entered, 1963 would have been their last graduating class. And my mother said I wasn't going to Hampton because there were too many men in that town, because there were the naval bases. And I was very protected. You know, my father was 42 when I was born. I was his first child. So, you know, I was like very protected. My father carried a gun and he threatened to shoot people sometimes, boys who looked at us. It's a true story. And so Mother made the right decision. She sent me to Berea, and that's where I went to school. And we had very similar, we just had our 55th reunion this year, and the two Black women that were in my class with me, we talk about that because one of the things that happened, they came into the class as sophomores. I came in as a young freshman, but we supported each other. And we talked about an incident where a white faculty member brought us in, set us down, and called us the Three Musketeers. And she said, I'm calling you that because I've never, when I went to nursing school, saw a successful Black student. And when I was a student and as a faculty member, I've never seen a successful one. So you Three Musketeers showed me what you're gonna do. Now, well, how do you process that? Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of connections that when Dr. Gary was talking, that was, I think, a common practice, because when I went into nursing, there was less than 1% of people of color in nursing. So it was really a upper middle class, white women's profession for the most part. So fast forward all of these years, that's why I am so passionate about mentoring. Now I have to call out, when I was at Berea, there were two white women that helped me, that we didn't use the word mentoring then, they just helped me. Miss Martha Pride, because at Berea you had to have a driver's license your senior year. And you asked, why would you have to have a driver's license in nursing school? Anybody have an idea why that might be?
Is it because you had to do the community health thing?
Public health.
Public health.
But you see, we didn't do public health in Berea. We went out into rural hiding camp. Do you all remember, what's that not the Beverly Hills, that show with the two guys that were I'm blocking on the name, but we went in Hyden County. Hyden County is where Frontier Nursing Service is. So we were a part of Frontier Nursing Service, the horses, but we had Jeeps. So you had to know how to drive. I didn't know how to drive. My parents had a car. My mother had a car. Nobody was allowed to drive the car but my mother, not even my father. My mother drove the car. And no children drove the car. Okay, so you can get a little idea about my mother. And she's about 4'11" and probably weighs less than 100 pounds. But she was a mighty person. She was the only person that drove the car. So the dean brought me in the first semester of my senior year. She said, do you have a driver's license? I said, no, I don't. She said, well, at the end of the semester, if you don't have one, you're out of here. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my God. So Dr. Martha Pride, who was my psych teacher, get the connection? I was already going that way, and I was really going that way then. She taught me how to drive. That woman came every day, and I wrecked her car. I hit the gas pump. And she still came every day. So I got my license. I was able to go to Hyden County, do my public health. Out there in rural, you talking about rural country where women had their babies. We had a person who had a baby. She locked the door, wouldn't let me in, had the baby, cut the cord, then I cleaned her up. Okay, it was that kind of rule. And the houses were on stilts sometimes, and the rats were running under it. And I'll tell this one story, and then about, because I'm connecting it with mentoring. I went out with my little birth control kit, because this woman had 2 babies with cleft palate, cleft lip. I don't know if you've all ever seen that, but we had to teach them how to feed the baby, how to care for the baby until the repair could be done. And so we decided, in our nursing conference, that there was a genetic thing going on here, and that part of my teaching would be to teach birth control. So I had a little thing with all the birth control and all the diaphragm, all of that stuff for back in the day. I go in and I taught my first lesson. I go back the next time, her husband was there. Now, you have to imagine, I was a lot smaller then. He picked me up by my little uniform and set me outside. And he told me that his children were his wealth. And I was messing with his wealth. And that was when I really, well, I learned a lot of lessons about cultural competence, but it clicked with me that just because you have a notion about how somebody ought to live, it may not be their notion. Now, you don't always let people, you always have to report or try to talk to people about things that are going to be dangerous or those kind of things, but you really have to think very carefully about how you enter into somebody else's world to tell them about what they ought to be doing. So I learned that, and I got called names a lot of times, but at Berea, they told you if you were a person of color, you always wore your uniform. Everybody in Hyden County, because Berea had been going there for 20 years, they recognized the uniform, they recognized the car, because it had Berea College, God is made of one blood, all nations of men. And so for the ones of you who don't know, Carter G. Woodson, father of Black history, Berea College, and Berea College was a school that started in 1855, never segregated until Kentucky law segregated it for a couple of years, and they finally did a lawsuit and opened it up again. So it was always equal education and international education. We had kids from Afghanistan, with lots of kids from the continent, because we had a farm. So we raised all of our own food, it was that kind of school. So fast forward now. So that's the connection, and the connection to Dr. Gary's experience and our experience, and what we like to think, and that's why we like to hear from you, that things are not where, my husband and I say this to each other every day, things are not where they were, they're not where we would like them to be, but they certainly are not where they were. And so we want to think that every generation has at least a better experience or more resources to deal with that experience. Because when the University of Kentucky told me I wasn't going to be able to go there, they didn't take a student of color until the 70s. It was 1972, 73, 74, somewhere in there. You all can check me on that. I know it was in the 70s. I was already out of school because I started in 1964. That was my time. But needless to say, I'm still mad at my mother for not letting me go to Hampton. But I think she was right. I probably wouldn't have made it. Been running off somewhere with some sailor. So,
Well, you still can talk to her and let her know before her birthday
but
about how you feel about Hampton.
I tell her a lot. She'll pay me in the mind, because she also wanted me to be a nurse anesthetist, because my mother we lived in rural places, and in rural places they taught people how to do things because they didn't have a lot of nurses and that kind of stuff. So my mother was a certified first assist. So some of you know, she went in there and she did surgery, and the surgeons wouldn't operate without her, and she'd sew up people, she just did all kinds of stuff. And she decided that I should be a nurse anesthetist because it was independent, lots of money, and I could set my own goal. To this day, my mother's 99, we're having the 99th birthday in 2 weeks. She still said, and just what is it that you do in nursing? I just really don't understand it, but anyway. So, having said that, and one thing about what do you do to support yourself? This is a place where you come to make relationships and connections to support yourself. And if you have people of color in your school, the only reason I think a lot of times I was able to get through that is Tisi, her name is Latice Ballou, and was my classmate, and Juanita Smith was my two other Black women and we leaned on each other a lot. And it's interesting because I've been trying to get the demographics from Berea, because we're a small school, about who's in the academy. And Juanita and I both are two people in the academy. I think we might be and Lily Shortridge, who was in my class too, I think we are maybe the only people, I'm not sure. We don't know yet, but Jimmy Lou Stevenson was wrong when she said we wouldn't make it and we wouldn't make some contributions, because all three of us, because my friend TC worked in the VA and did wonderful things for about 30 years. So we all have made excellent contributions to nursing. So now with all the connections being made, let's talk about mentoring, but that's why I'm so passionate about it. But I'm going to tell you that, so this is how to get invited to the book party and how to show up and show out. And basically, my title was taken because I was thinking about it, because Janet Jackson and I shared this experience together. It's a narrative about, I'm going to weave in the narrative about the MFP, but I'm going to use this book party thing as the example, or as you all like to say in nursing now, the exemplar. Okay, so that this is going to be the exemplar. Okay, so let's get started here. So here's the book. This is the story beginning, and it's the story ending. This is a book that's coming out as we speak. It's Mentoring and Nursing Through Narrative Stories Across the World. So it's an international book, and it's Nancy is the first author there is the American author, and she's really a friend of mine. I've known Nancy for a long time, but I didn't know Nancy was connected to this project, so it wasn't nepotism that we got in here. And then the second author is in Germany or Sweden, one or two. So there's an international author and there's an American author, and it's published through Springer, but a project of Sigma Theta Tau. So, and the book is about mentoring across the world, why it's important, how it's done in different places, why it's done in different places, and what can we learn from it. It's a huge book. It's huge. It's big. Well, I'm going to tell you why it's so big. So here's the book, okay? So when the book first got announced, and Janet, you can add to this because, sometimes I get all confused in my head about how things came down. So there was an announcement that came out about this book, but I didn't see it. Janet didn't see it at first, I don't think. We didn't see it, but it came out and we were like, so then somehow, I think Janet got wind of it. And then Janet said, well, this book is coming out, but the deadline was about a month or two past. I said, well, I think we ought to write a proposal and say we're going to get a chapter. What can they say? They can say yes or no, right? It was two months past the deadline. So we thought about it, and I said yes. So Janet said, well, let's go right ahead. So I said, okay. So let me go here and tell you what we did. So I said, I first looked at, this is the first book devoted to mentoring stories of nurses. So it's a first. It addresses mentoring trajectories, over 300 mentors and mentee nurse authors from all continents. That's why it's so big. And it's going to be expensive. It's about $90 or more. I looked on Amazon, and it's authored by prestigious nursing experts in mentoring and internationally recognized in their field. So don't believe everything you read. But anyway, so that's what it's all about. And we wrote a proposal. We submitted it. I looked, though, to see who the authors were and that kind of thing. So I said, I know Nancy. So I said to Nancy, I wrote a proposal, and I said, we have this wonderful program. I've kind of been checking out your book, and although you're going to have people from all over the continent, you don't have any diversity in that book from the continent, and I think we have a lot to offer you, and here's my proposal. Here's our proposal. And so they looked at it, and they were like, great, good, write it. And then I was like, oh, be careful what you ask for. Because then it came at a time when we were really, really busy. And I was like, oh, man. Now, when it's like once I got, my husband and I moved into a Quaker community because he was a professor at Haverford College, and so we lived in the Quaker community. So the Quakers have the Quaker Women's Group. They didn't invite me. So I raised holy, you know what? And then it was the sewing circle. Now I don't know how to sew. So, but I raised, and my husband kept saying, Freida, you don't know how to sew. I said, well, they should have invited me anyway. So anyway, they invited me. Then I decided I didn't want to go. And then I felt like I had to go because I raised so much hell, right? So that's the way it was about this book. I said, oh, we don't really have time to do this, but I raised so much sand, so we did it. So I thought, here's a good lesson for the fellows. Because I've heard stories from fellows who write articles, and you submit them, and they don't get accepted, and then you get all dejected, and then you don't want to do it anymore, and all of that. But the key is, when you're not invited, you keep inviting yourself. Because otherwise, you might not get ever to the party, right? And for the ones of you who have academic careers, or even if you don't, even if you just want to spread some knowledge that's not out there, then you want to be published so that people can know from your lens how you think this person ought to be treated, what you think is the best approach for this person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided this is what you do. Sometimes when you're not explicitly invited to something, like we were not explicitly invited to this, writing this book chapter at first. First of all, don't start thinking in the negative in the beginning, that somehow they didn't want you because they didn't think you were qualified, blah, blah, blah. You have to work around not doing that. You have to reorder your thinking, like cognitive behavior therapy will ask you all know, how many of you know how to do cognitive behavior therapy? You know, the question is, what's your evidence for that? And then you change your thinking about what your evidence. So you say, what's your evidence for that they didn't want you? They just didn't know you existed, right? So when they put this proposal out, they didn't know the MFP existed probably, so it was okay. So if it's a scholarly event, sort of as a publication or presentation, and you think you have something to offer, then you present yourself because you got something to offer. And that's part of what I think DEI is about, that we don't have to always be invited. We have to put ourselves there and say what we have to offer. And that's the show up and show out part of it. That sometimes an invitation is broadly sent out and they don't know about you and they don't know you're interested, and you see it and you make yourself seen. And I got 5 minutes? Okay. Oh, little time for questions. So, okay, let me just go through this. What you need to do and think. Know you have something critical to offer. That's the imposter syndrome. It is real, but there are ways to cope with it and strategize about it. And that's a whole notion for another day. Check your networks and allies when you see an invitation or to participate in a scholarly activity, because there's beauty in networking. All of you should be networking with each other around different projects and different things that you're doing. Use these networks and allies to support your participation in these scholarly things. Inform yourself, that's the important thing, and I think every speaker today has said that. Inform yourself about the project so you know what it is, what you don't know, and what you need to do to be prepared, and prepare a proposal that stands out, that really demonstrates what you know. And then this is our chapter on developing mentoring and diversity. And since we're running out of time, what I'm going to do is just leave these PowerPoints. But what I want you to do is to note the why and the what about what we did in our chapter. I just want you to know what we did in our chapter. We did the why and the what and the how about mentoring. And what we did in the why, what, and how about mentoring is we have exemplars again. This is one, mentorship from coast to coast, and we're going to put it up on the website. And I want you to go and listen to it because these are two people. What Dr. Giovanni did, what Dr. Giovanni, yes, Olivia did was she had funded research. She had book projects. She had her mentor to be a part. She first got him on her research team, and she had him to be part, and she took him right through the process so that he didn't have to. I had to do a postdoc when I got out because I had to learn how to do that. He didn't have to do that because he did that. He did that right when he was going through his process, through his mentorship with her. And they've published, at least 4 or 5 articles. He's got his own research now and so forth and so on. They'll take you step by step. So the next one this is Marie E. Smith and Dr. Shaquita Starks. This is one of the outcomes of some of their work. Dr. Starks was Dr. East's mentor. And they did work together, and they did a brilliant piece on COVID-19 and the digital divide and what was happening in Black communities, and it's been picked up by a lot of people. It's a really good piece of work. And we are right to questions and answers. How's that? Oh, no. The one thing I want you to do, the conceptual framework that guided our work on the chapter, because the way the chapter is organized, Janet and I are the authors, and we set the framework for how we looked at mentoring and the mentoring program and that kind of thing. And then we put our exemplars in there of Shaquita and Marie E. Smith, Dr. Giovanni and Dr. and Angel. Yes, thank you. And then there was one other one, Mary Lou de Leon Sants and Juan Herrera. They were the example of the master student and she mentored him as a master student, how to get his credentials, how to get all his stuff ready to get his certification and to present himself and his CV and all of that. So there were 3 exemplars in there, and that's what our chapter is about. Now, the conceptual framework for any of you who are thinking about doing qualitative research is, I highly recommend this book. It's by C.R. Tolliver. She's not a nurse. I do a lot of my stuff outside of nursing in terms of theoretical stuff that informs how I think. But she wrote a book called Recovering Black Storytelling and Qualitative Research. And while the focus is Black, it is BIPOC oriented, so it could be useful for anybody who's in our BIPOC categories. And it's Black narratives, and it explores the term of Afrofuturism. And basically all that means is, she says, in qualitative research, what we've done is to do these narratives, and then we do the analysis, but it's so Eurocentric, guided in terms of how we do the theme abstraction and that kind of stuff, but that we need to really trust the narrative and the storyteller of, in this case, she was working with Black girls, and to trust the narrative of the people and let the narrative stand on its own. And that's because it looks at the life experience of the person, both historically, which Dr. Gary was talking about. What is historic and what is now? What is historic and what is present? Because that is what guides the narrative. And that's the conceptual framework that guided how we looked at setting up how the mentor and mentee dyads would tell their narratives. So check that book out. You can get it from Amazon too. Okay, I'm done.
I know that we have a break, and so people are looking to me to make sure I don't take too much of the
Okay.
time. But I would like to open it up for questions, and if you do have a question, just remember to say your name and your state.
Hi, my name is Rashida. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania, but I live in Virginia. Thank you so much, Dr. Outlaw, for this talk. I guess my question is related to how to leverage those mentorship relationships best, especially when your mentor is a superstar like you, and you don't want to take up too much of their time, and you're trying to be mindful. How do you leverage those relationships best and like take most advantage of them?
Okay, so I have an article that's an old article that I should put up on the website, but I wrote it for the academy on how to work with your mentor when your mentor is different from you, like white and you're black, basically, or minority. But there are strategies in there, and the thing you do, I'm always open. You can take up my time because I'm kind of semi-retired now, and I'm just home. I don't mind. But for people who are actively, involved in their getting tenure or preserving their tenure, getting promoted, or if they're in a clinical setting and they have a private practice and all that, their time is of essence. What you want to do is you want to be prepared. You don't want to come and say, well, I think, you want to know what you want to know, what you want them to help you with. You don't want to be shy about that. You want to tell them what you need, because it's better to tell somebody what you need than to come and have them trying to be guessing what you need, because that's frustrating for the person. We have a saying in our house. It just makes you mad and frustrates the pig. You never try to teach a pig how to sing. Just frustrates the pig and makes you mad. So you tell them what you need. Tell them what, and you show up when you say you're going to show up. You don't make the appointment if you know you can't do it. And if you have to cancel it, because sometimes things come up, you let them know in plenty of time, because time is of essence. But if you know what you want and you're clear about it, people, when they agree to be your mentor, they are committed to that. And they really want to do the best that they can with you. And so you should not be pensive about taking up their time. You should understand that when they decide that they're going to do it, they know there's going to be time involved, but there are things from you that they expect, and that's be prepared, be on time, and tell them straight up what you need, and show up.
Any questions?
No, they want to go.
I know, but I do have one question.
Yes.
What are your hopes for mentorship through MFP, whether what you would like to see the program do for like the next 10 years, or what you would like people to know that they could get from MFP currently?
I didn't plant that, but what I hope is all of you, when you finish, will be mentors. That's my first hope and my expectation. That's the first thing, because we have to grow our mentors, and we have to grow people who are still out there practicing and teaching and doing all of those things. So that's the first thing. I want people to honor it and to know how important it is, and how one of the things on this slide that I took out, thank God I took some things out, that one of the things that propelled us to do this also is that mentoring is not really new, but it's a formal science. It's fairly, I'd say maybe 15 years where we're collecting the science. And what we know is when you do have a mentor, you advance in your career better. And it starts in medicine. It's proven to be the case in medicine. It's proven to be the case in nursing. But so mentoring gets you further along for a lot of reasons, because there's networks and hookups and experiences and resources. So we need to grow this program. We need to keep it going. We need to have new and fresh ideas and eyes. And we need to, as the science grows, we need to be then informed by the science about how we're growing. Like one of the things we're doing with Dr. Josie and Dr. Parks, we are doing a deep dive in. We haven't dove very deeply lately, but we're trying to look at words, because words are very important. With psych nurses, we know that. So there really is a difference between mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship. Now that doesn't mean they have to always be separate and apart, but there are differences, there are different skills, there are different things, there are different outcomes, there are different expectations. But people use those interchangeably sometimes, and it messes up everything, because people are talking about stuff and they think they're talking about one thing, they're really talking about another thing. And when you do that, it really messes up things. We know that, right? From when we're doing therapy or when we're trying to get things understood with our patients, that we need to be clear about what we're talking about. So those are the kinds of things, those would be the hopes that I would have. Janet, do you have a hope?
I do have a hope.
Okay, come up.
Good meeting, Dr. Outlaw. First of all, I'd like to applaud you for your presentation and for the title. She sent me a copy of her presentation to approve, and unfortunately, I couldn't open the document. So, I just approved it anyway. And then when I saw the title, how to get invited to the
Book party.
I was like, wow, that was an excellent title, because I'm all about deadlines. And when I saw that it was past the deadline, and she was like, well, we're going to do it anyway. And so what she didn't tell you, when we submitted the proposal, when she wrote the proposal, when we submitted it, at first they just gave us an opportunity to write about the model, our MFP mentoring model. But when they got the proposal, they thought it was so good that they wanted us to do a whole chapter on the diversity. And so that was, you left that out.
Yeah.
The other thing she mentioned, her hope is that each of you would become mentors once you graduate from the program. My hope is, in order to make our mentor, there's always room for improvement. Mm-hmm. So in order to make our mentoring program better, I would like to, my hope is that when we get our new grant, there's talk that there could be some supplemental funding. And so I would like to use some of that supplemental funding, if we get it, to actually have like a 2-day retreat where we bring all the mentors, the mentees. For 2 days, we have training for the mentors, and then the mentees will get training. Then we will bring you together with your mentor and mentee on how to answer some of the questions that you're having when your mentor is busy and you don't want to ask them. So we hope to have training that will help you answer those questions and be better prepared once you become a mentor, to the program, to mentor the next generation. So that is my hope. So that's why I'm asking everybody, and please complete your evaluations to give us the documentation we need to get the money that we need to provide you with what you need to be successful. That is my hope. The other thing is, we've been thinking about we're talking about the countdown to the 50th anniversary. So we're like, where do we go our 50th year to celebrate?
Hawaii.
That might asked me to like, because that was my thought too. But it's not Hawaii. I thought Hawaii because our 2019 trip to Hawaii was canceled because of COVID. But in talking to the staff and other people, we're thinking about San Diego.
Okay, that's good.
So how far is that from Irvine, Dawn? About an hour. Okay, all right, so we need somebody to help us. Okay, all right. So we're thinking about San Diego, probably July, because the whole, our meeting and convention services staff, we need to start looking at hotels now. And then if we get the additional funding, then we'll have to figure out, we'll probably just go, when Dr. Gary was the director, we did like a writing, I think it was a writing workshop where we went to it was an airport hotel. And we was there for like two days. And it was very intense where, you know, we worked with the students that were working on their dissertation. So I'm thinking something like that for the mentees. So complete your evaluations and let's get some more money and become more effective at mentoring.
Okay, so I know I get a little corny because I do like to think about the way we open things up and as we close things. And I think just connecting from the last speaker to this one, I want to end on what are the hopes for the future, because we had a speaker who had really manifested this and we're all living in it. And I hope that as we think about what our hopes for the future, not just in terms of mentorship, but just in continuing MFP, that it's us. We're the hope. And maybe 50 years from now, one of us will be saying, I don't know if they'll have stages in the future. And then we're talking about the next hope for the next 50 years or the next 100 years. And maybe we'll make it to Hawaii.
Hawaii maybe. With climate change.
Oh, I have one other thing. The book, the mentoring book that Dr. Outlaw was talking about, I think it's coming out in July. I've already ordered copies on Amazon.
Yeah.
So once it is out, we'll make sure that you get a copy of it.
Oh, thank you.